Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe I can also tell kind of the origin story of that model.
Yeah, please.
Like
Absolutely.
how that model kind of unfolded for me is that, as I said, I went through this original coach training back in 2000, 2001, 2002. And like many coaches after their initial training, I said, this is great. I want more. And so I went out and I learned a bunch of other methods. And, I spent, to be honest, like most of the next decade, like taking training classes, learning methods, learning styles of psychotherapy, styles of coaching, styles of somatic work, all kinds of different things. And the thing that was most striking to me was that they were all so different from each other. All these methods are so different, but they all work. And I was like, how is that even possible? Like, I thought that it would be like everybody's coaching or doing offering therapy to human beings. We probably all have variations on a theme. Like, probably everything is just more or less the kind of the same thing because we're working with human beings and human beings are human beings. And this was just my naivete to recognize that human beings are vastly complex, and in fact, we need a lot of different ways of working with ourselves. And so I was surprised. They're all different, but they all work. But I also noticed they all fail to work. Like, and this is what happens. Like, you get one method and it works with the first three people, and then it doesn't work with the next six people. And you're like, hang on a minute, like it was working, now it's not working. Like, and so this is a real challenge for a lot of people because they get committed to a particular method, and then they just want to see everything in those terms. And so what I realized, I kind of sort of grabbed a hold of this question, like, and this phenomena, like, what explains this? Different methods, they all work, they all fail to work. How is that even possible? And then I had an integrating insight, and I said they all work at different depths. And so when a client is at a particular depth of self-contact or contact with others in the world, then meeting them there with a method that specializes at that depth is very skillful, and it will work. But if the client is at a different depth of contact, meeting them there with that same method won't be as skillful. And that explained why it worked and why it doesn't work for these methods. So I began to wonder, because I had this background in integral theory. So immediately I began to think, like, could there be a method that understood depth and that integrated all the different moves of these different methodologies and kind of tracked the client in terms of the depth that they were at, and then basically met them with the methodology that was most skillful at that depth? And so the first experiments that I started to do, I thought, well, I've got this depth. There's sort of the shallow depth of parts. Then the depth of process is deeper, then the depth of presence and absence is even deeper, than the depth of non-duality, the deepest depth. And I thought that mostly I was seeing clients and I was seeing they were at the shallowest depth. And I knew that the more I worked with them, the more access they had to the deeper depths. So I tried to coach them at one depth for a while and then graduate them to the next depth and so on. And I found that that didn't really work, because since I was sensitive to depth, what I noticed is that even in the span of a single coaching conversation, the client was navigating up and down in the depths, back and forth, back and forth. And so I couldn't just change methods in that way, one method for, say, 6 months, and then another method for 6 months, and then another method for 6 months, or something like that. That I had to actually have these methods formed in a way with like gestures or moves that I could do with clients as they're fluidly moving up and down in these depths. What I saw, though, if you stand back and kind of look over a long stretch of time, you can see a kind of developmental stage model sort of unfolding in the client's life. And what I noticed is that with more development, we have a greater capacity to inhabit more of our depth, not just the deeper depths, but the entire span or range of depth. And so it is possible to take this sort of ontology of depth and understand it in terms of developmental stage models. And so what I noticed is that basically I'm just practicing in the moment, in the present moment with the client. And oftentimes we're moving up and down in the depths. And as we practice that, the client is learning to inhabit more range of their depth consciously. And over time, that develops them.
Yeah, and I think I kind of understand what you mean by depth, but I kind of want to unpack that a little bit and kind of um, tell you what I'm thinking. But to me, it's like when you talk about depth and you talk about, let's say the highest or the lowest depth, right? Like I don't even know how to say it, but say we're at the least amount of depth, we actually are most ego identified, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe the most contracted identified were our thoughts. And then as we go into more depth, there becomes like maybe less contraction, more expansion, less identifying with our ego, more of kind of like this open awareness space. And that's what you're saying. And for everybody, that changes, right? Like I could, in my own experience, there's times where I'm very contracted, very identified with the ego. And then there's other times where I'm less contracted, I'm more open. There's the self starts to lose its like sense of being solid. There's more of a fluidity, and I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So at the shallower depths, the depth of parts, the way you can tell that you're actually at the depth of parts is that when you look around in terms of the world and when you peer inwardly, what you see is separation. So, and this is usually the depth that we navigate life in. It's a very pragmatic and practical depth to be in. When you navigate through your house, walk through your house, or drive through the city, or whatever you're doing, it's really important to understand where things are, that things are separate from us, right? Because we can move through the spaces and things like that. When we look inwardly, though, what we notice is that we have parts of our ego structure. There's the part of me that felt hurt when I was a little kid, and that part is still here. And there's a part of me that, really tries to defend me from ever feeling hurt that way again. And we have lots of different defenses. We have parts that are ambitious, that really are trying to do good in the world. And the average healthy, psychologically healthy adult has something like 30 to 50 parts. That's just a rough approximation. So the thing is that when we peer inwardly, we're actually very complex on the inside. We have whole constellations of parts, and different parts are getting triggered at different times. They're not all running and active at the same moment. So one part gets triggered, other parts get triggered, and we run into situations where we have parts that are both triggered, but that want us to do opposite things. Like, classic scenario might be something like a part of me that really wants me to quit my job because it's a toxic workplace and the job is killing me. But then there's another part of me that says, hey man, the economy's not doing so well. You've got a job. Hang on to that. Hang on to that. You need the money. And guess what? Both parts are trying to take care of us, but who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? Well, they're both good guys, right? So we feel stuck in the middle of something like that, or we feel stuck in a relationship. Like part of me says, oh, I want to move on. I'm done with this relationship. Other part says, maybe this could work out. Like you should hang in there, tough it out, And so the thing about all these parts is that we can get pulled in a lot of different directions, a lot of inner tensions, and what this leads to is stress. And so here we are living in this complex world with everything is accelerating, and there's just information overload, and we've got these parts that are all trying to deal with all of that and getting triggered left and right, and they're trying to be helpful, but very often they're just leading to us feeling stressed and intense and stuck. And so that's like what life is like at the depth of parts, and it's mostly where we're living. Now, if we learned how to practice parts work, which is one of the ways that in Aletheia coaching we work with this, right? We're working with these parts. We connect with the parts. We relate to those parts, and we relate to their good intentions, and we love them and appreciate them for their good intentions. And when the part feels seen and understood in that deep way, in that way where it feels completely accepted as it is, what happens is it relaxes. And in that relaxation, there is a spontaneous dropping in depth. We drop down into the depth of process. The depth of process feels a lot like a kind of fluidity, like you're talking about, right? It's kind of fluid. We notice a lot of it is like feelings, right? So we notice bodily felt senses, the flow of feeling through our body, the flow of emotion. But here, these aren't reactive emotions. These are more like existential emotions, like the feeling of being. Like the feeling of being in this place is this. If I move over here, it feels a little bit different. There's a flow that we can move through. And at this depth of process, we actually get access to a kind of, what's going on in our relationships. So relatedness is most easily navigated at this depth. And what happens is that things are moving. So it's not actually possible to get stuck at the depth of process. It's like plunking yourself in the middle of a river and the river just carries you along, right? So if you drop into the river of experience, it will carry you along and help you navigate these complex relationships. So every time I'm working with especially people in relational jobs like managers or leaders, like getting them to access this depth of process is super important because it's what allows them to actually feel what's going on in the relationships as opposed to just acting from their parts, which are very defensive, right? And then if you follow that flow and process, what will actually happen is that flow is not going in a random direction. It's going toward the realization of who we are in our wholeness. And so the more we follow that flow, the more we see an opening. I call it a portal that kind of opens up in our experience where we sort of drop in one more time. And when we drop into that, this is a kind of open awareness state that you named. This kind of open awareness, we drop in and we actually drop into presence. And presence is quality rich, like love and compassion and will and courage and peacefulness and joy and all kinds of different virtues. And we recognize ourselves as being a compassionate presence or a courageous presence or a loving presence or a persevering presence, right? And that capacity, that groundedness in our own beingness at this depth actually helps us to navigate the complexity of the world. And then if we actually hang there long enough, we'll also realize absence, because presence and absence co-arise at this step. They're like yin and yang in Taoist philosophy. They're sort of mutual. And what can happen is if we really open up to embracing both absence and presence, this is one of the ways to actually drop into the deepest depth of non-duality. And as we drop into non-duality, the hallmark experience is one of non-separation, kind of like the opposite of the depth of parts, where the hallmark, the central experience was separation. So here we feel really deeply, deeply held, deeply belonging in the world. We feel like we're exactly where we belong, exactly in the world. Dropping into non-duality has all kinds of benefits. It sparks creativity. It allows us to feel a sense of safety and security, which if we're struggling with any kind of attachment issues, like this is a place of secure base, of ultimate security where we drop in, we feel more trusting of ourselves and trusting of our capacity to navigate situations in which there's distrust, right? And there's lots of other things that can come from that. So it's like actually having access to this like stack of depth, these 4 different depths, gives us access to all kinds of resources for navigating life, for orienting in life, for sense making, for stepping in, for bringing all of ourselves into life. So that's really what I think development is it's learning to bring your whole self in.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and as you're talking, I can kind of go through those different depths, and for me, it's like you say, the parts one is like we're very much in our head, everything's rational, everything's mental, and then like I do this practice called circling. So in circling, usually you start out, people come in and you're very much in your head, telling stories, about what happened yesterday, what's going to happen tomorrow. And then as you learn, you come down into what I believe is what you call process, and it becomes this kind of fluid, and it's really about feelings and what's here right now. And then as you stay, and you can still have like feelings, and you're still kind of relating. And then as you stay deeper and you get calmer, and a lot of times it starts happening in silence, that's when the presence really opens up for me. It's like you sense that there's open awareness, and you're just very present. There's like this, for me, a sense of like luminosity. Everything's just kind of vibrant and alive, and the mind is very quiet.